Welcome to Buffalo Rumblings Live. My name is Matt Warren. I am, of course, not joined tonight, as you can see, by Brian Galliford, who has been caught up at work diagnosing and fixing problems with the new iOS 8 that's come online. But I think it'd be funnier if you guys could post pictures of like cats chewing through computer cords or something like that in our comments section so that we can have Brian here in spirit. We're here to talk right now about the Buffalo Bills' second straight win to start the year. Of course, they beat the Miami Dolphins on Sunday in a 29-10 slobber knockering, if I can use that as a term there. And while many of us may have thought about how they might blow that game at certain points, and certainly when Miami came out to start the third quarter and had a nice little drive, I know that it crept up in some people's minds. The Bills had answers, and they frequently had answers on Sunday, whether it was Kyle Williams coming in for a sack to stall a drive, or a Corey Graham pass breakup, or an E.J. Manuel pass, or excuse me, or even a C.J. Spiller kickoff return touchdown. The Bills always had an answer, and it never felt like the game got away from them. They always played under control, and things seemed to go their way. But that's how the first two games have gone. That's why they're 2-0. So let's start with those special teams, because I know that I, for one, was a particular critic of Danny Crossman coming into the season, and it turns out that he's not so bad after all when you can add a couple starters to your defense or to your special teams rotation, and then bring in some more core specialists and things like that. And that's exactly what the Bills did. They went out and signed Brandon Spikes, who comes in and plays on special teams. They signed Corey Graham, who has been playing a little bit of special teams, or at least that's his background. And, of course, Anthony Dixon, who came in. It was actually Spikes who I believe was the one that sprung C.J. Spiller on his 102-yard kick-off return with a big block that Spiller cut right behind. And then, of course, Anthony Dixon coming in and blocking the punt that almost was for naught. They were able to get a pretty good return off of the blocked punt, the Miami Dolphins were, to get it near the line of scrimmage. The Bills were able to corral him eventually, whoever it was from the Dolphins that picked up the ball and tackle him. But those were two huge plays that led directly to 10 points from the Bills' offense, which, doesn't seem like a ton, but the offense didn't really have to do anything on that second drive, and they ended up with 3 points from Dan Carpenter, I believe. Was that? Now I want to. No, that was definitely from that. Colton Schmidt has been a revelation at punter, one of the league's top punters through 2 weeks. It just seems like everything's going right on special teams so far. They've done really well in covering kicks as well. So it seems like stuff, like I'm going to keep saying it, stuff is falling into place for the Bills. It's going the way it's supposed to go, and that's going to be a key point later when we talk about what we still need to see from them. What else can you say about the defense too is that the front four is doing exactly what we thought they were capable of. Mario Williams, Kyle Williams, Marcel Darius, and Jerry Hughes are getting pressure. They had a bunch of sacks of Ryan Tannehill this week, or Tanny Hill, depending on how you want to say it. And people are saying that Darius is non-existent, and Joe Biscaglia actually had a really nice comment for them after watching the All-22 this week. They said that he was doing the work of 2 different dudes, and so as he's doing the work of 2 guys, it frees up other folks to come in and kind of make the play. So it's really interesting to know what's going on with the Bills' defense right now. They've been making plays when they needed to, and Corey Graham has been stepping up in that cornerback role. And it's harder for me to switch back and forth to the comments and things like that when it's just me by myself. But when Corey Graham is in there at cornerback, it allows them to do a little bit more. And someone in the comments asked why he's playing off so much. Well, it's because he's a great open field tackler, and they want to keep stuff in front of them. They're not giving up big plays in the passing game. And even Stephon Gilmore's touchdown that he allowed against the Dolphins, watch that play 5 times and clap your hands for. Now I can't even remember who it was, but I mean, it was an amazing catch. Gilmore was in the right position. Tannehill put it right where it was supposed to be. That's what happens in the NFL sometimes. He got beat, and not because he did a bad job. So the quarterbacks have been playing really, really well. And then you got guys like Denoris Searcy taking a new role this year as Jarris Byrd is in New Orleans, and Searcy made a key play to stop Tannehill on the 4th down read option play. So you've got guys really coming into their roles, and that I haven't even talked about the linebacker core yet. Week 1, it was Brandon Spikes, so kind of being all over the place. In week 2, he was off the field more as Nigel Bradham kind of comes back from his suspension, and the Dolphins go nickel a lot after their running back goes out. Noshan Moreno goes down with an elbow injury. And so they're in nickel a lot, so Spikes is off the field, and you get a guy, a 3rd-round draft pick like Preston Brown, who can come in and play 100% of the snaps. It's amazing that even losing a guy like Keith Rivers, they can still cover that area of the field. And the Bills, as Brian wrote, the Bills have to be psyched about this linebacker core going forward when Kiko Alonso returns. Being able to put Preston Brown in the middle, Bradham on one side, and Kiko on the other side as starters next year if Brandon Spikes doesn't re-sign, it's just going to be formidable. And so the defense is really coming together, even under Schwartz, who isn't bringing as much pressure as Mike Pettin has did last year. They're still getting pressure. They were still able to move Jay Cutler off his spot a little bit. They were certainly able to torment Ryan Tannehill, and it was just good to see. They kept the Dolphins off the. I mean, I think they didn't get past the 39-yard line till the last play or till the last drive of the first half. I think they had something like 40 yards of total offense in the first half until that last drive where they ran it 6 times to run out the clock at the end of the first half. I mean, the Dolphins could get nothing going, and that just breeds more confidence with the offense, even though they're only kicking field goals. And that's really a good segue to the offense. And E.J. Manuel's been efficient. He's completed 2/3 of his passes. He's got touchdowns. He's got great yards per attempt. Well, not great, but he's got good yards per attempt. It's been nice to see that a guy with 10, 11 career starts has been able to take, I don't know, a step this season, especially after the preseason we saw. Spiller, of course, breaking that big run helps the running game numbers, but I still think in this game the running game was not necessarily a huge help to the offense. And even in the first week, the passing game was what was moving the chains for most of the game until a big run kind of opened it up in the first week. And Spiller had a 47-yard run or something like that in this week with another nice hole to get around to the outside. With that being said, inside the red zone, the offensive line is really one of the big things holding this offense back from scoring in the red zone. People are complaining about the red zone efficiency, and they should. But Chris Williams missed at least 1 or 2 key blocks in the red zone that would have allowed Fred Jackson to get near the goal line on some of those plays. Eric Wood and Seantrell, I'm going to say it right sooner or later, guys. Seantrell Henderson also missed blocks in the red zone, according to some of the All-22 reviews that I've read. I haven't been able to watch the All-22. If you can't tell, I'm a little bit under the weather. I have been for, since Sunday night. So, and it's not because I was celebrating a big Bills win. I didn't do anything differently on Sunday. But back to the topic at hand. In the red zone, those key blocks, I mean, that's 4 or 5 yards. That's another 4 yards untouched for Fred Jackson. And when you're on the 8-yard line, that's halfway there. And he's not living on a prayer like Bon Jovi. Oh, I thought we were done with that stuff. No. We'll talk about Terry Pagula maybe some other time. He did get approved by the Finance Committee today, so he's moving on to the next round. I did want to also, and I'm sure you guys are leaving comments in the comment section that I'll get to here in 1 second. But I wanted to talk, one of the advantages of having this podcast on Wednesday night instead of Tuesday night is we get to talk a little bit about the injury report. And while it looks like Sammy Watkins is going to be a full go, and Lee Smith might actually make a return this week, knocking Chris Gregg a little bit more out of the lineup, it also appears that Keith Rivers is working his way back. Stephon Charles was limited, and then Robert Woods had an ankle injury that made him limited today. And it's something to keep an eye on going forward. it would be a really big loss if they lost him. Obviously, he had a big week in the first week. They didn't look as much his way in week 2 as they were trying to show off Sammy Watkins just a little bit. But I think that Woods has a pretty great rapport with EJ Manuel that we talked about in our season preview. His numbers were so much better when Manuel was in the lineup last year, just because Manuel looked his way so much. And without that safety blanket, it's going to be, I think, tough for the Bills to get that passing game going. I did want to get to some of your questions in the comments section. Sorry, I have to read. Okay, what does the cornerback rotation mean for a guy like Nickel Roby? It means that he gets to be a little bit more, I don't know, what's the right way to say this? He gets to be more, I don't know, I think his role is best as that nickel/dime, and that's exactly what he gets to do here. He gets to be in the slot. He gets to, not necessarily line up against the bigger wide receivers and things like that. When you have a guy like Graham in there, it allows Leotis McKelvin a little bit more freedom. It allows Stephon Gilmore a little bit more freedom, so they can take breathers when they need them. And then if a guy like Gilmore is injured, it just allows for so much more. I don't know if it's going to necessarily hurt Roby or any of them in the long run, because sooner or later one of them is going to get hurt again, and then we'll just be back to where we were. But now we have the depth where we didn't really have it last year. Roaming Wyoming asks, what can they do to improve on the red zone game? Execution is the number one thing. The play calls are there. It's just one guy, one little piece. And I'm not regurgitating what Nate Hackett would say if he was here, but it's just one guy not holding a block, or, that pass from EJ Manuel to Sammy Watkins that everyone was kind of ripping on Manuel for. Well, maybe Watkins was supposed to go harder at the post, but he saw an open lane and turned up, and they just didn't have the communication. Either way, it's 1 yard. We're talking about 1 yard that they were off, and if Manuel throws it a little bit to the right, or if Watkins runs his route a little bit to the left, whether we know which one was wrong or not, if either of them were wrong, it's just little things that, sooner or later they're going to click, and it's going to be hard for all of the offensive linemen to keep messing up as much as they have been, I guess, is my best answer for that. Excuse me. Again, getting over that cold. People are, of course, worried about Antonio Gates, and I'll ask our guest coming up here in just a minute or so, John Gennaro from Bolts from the Blue. I'll ask him how he thinks that the Bills should cover Antonio Gates. The Bills haven't faced a tight end that can really kill them yet, because they were way more worried about the Bears wide receivers than they were about Martellus Bennett. It's going to be interesting how they do cover Gates. I would imagine that you're going to see it's going to be hard to see the 3 safety look, just because there are only 3 safeties on the roster, and if they put all their eggs in that basket, it's going to be really tough if one of them goes down with an injury. So I think this might actually go to the question that we answered before about the cornerback rotation. You might actually see a guy like Leotis McKelvin or Corey Graham covering Antonio Gates, getting his nose right up on in there, or maybe even, Stephon Gilmore. That was Orange Bill 70 that asked that question about Antonio Gates. Buff Bergendelphia says, I haven't stopped smiling. That's because I know I'm on camera. Again, my name is Matt Warren, and that has been our recap, quickly, of the Bills versus the Miami Dolphins. I'm going to welcome in John Gennaro from Bolts from the Blue. John, am I saying your name right?
Yeah, you might actually be the first person that has ever said it right the first time without having to be corrected. So congratulations. You deserve an award, a trophy of some sort.
Thank you. And you can definitely thank years of watching Die Hard movies with Holly Gennaro.
Yeah, that is the
Look it up.
Perfect answer. No, I'm fully aware, because when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I spotted Holly Gennaro, that being her maiden name, and it always stuck with me.
Well, I mean, if you're anything like her, obviously your BA, and we're glad to have you on here. So just give us a quick recap of what's happened the first 2 weeks for the San Diego Chargers. They're 1-1 heading into the game. How did they get there?
Well, in week one against the Arizona Cardinals, they were the last game on Monday Night Football. They basically looked terrible. They made mistakes on offense. They made mistakes on defense. The pass rush kept getting close, but letting Carson Palmer run to convert third downs, which apparently no one ever expected Carson Palmer to run because it was really the first time he ever had. And they lost that game basically in the fourth quarter with poor play calling on both sides of the ball and lack of execution. And they gave it away. Even though they lost by 1 point, they gave that game away. And then against the Seahawks, they were able to run the game plan that essentially they want to run every week. And it's what they try and do every week, which is long drives, 8, 9, 10 plays drives filled with short passes and runs on offense, and a defense that tries to attack and get to the quarterback before anything bad happens downfield. And that led to almost a dominating victory over the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, I mean, when we saw that score come across the line, it's like, okay, Seattle doesn't necessarily play as well on the road, but it's not like it was a long road trip, which we'll get to here in a second when talking about the Chargers coming across the country. But what were they? How are they able to really? I mean, Antonio Gates went off, and I can't remember who said it, but it was either the coach or like offensive coordinator said, I think that Phillip and Antonio could throw and catch touchdown passes while they were asleep. Is that the right quote?
That sounds like the right quote. I actually like the one from Greg Rosenthal at NFL.com that I heard on his podcast earlier today, where he said it's like watching two old guys play basketball at the gym. They have a bunch of trick shots and nothing's really impressive, but it's all going in.
Okay, that's a good one too. So I know you were on the line earlier. What can the Bills do to slow down Antonio Gates?
They can get a time machine and they can re-sign Jarvis Byrd. Is essentially the answer. Unless there's a safety, I mean, I don't know the Bills nearly as well as you do, but unless there's a safety that is an all-pro type safety, especially in man coverage, they're going to struggle against Gates. And even if you cover Gates, you're still going to struggle to cover Ladarius Green. I mean, one of the things that led to the Chargers' win over the Seahawks was Ladarius Green was the one who was getting covered by a safety, and they tried to cover Antonio Gates with a linebacker, figuring he's getting old, he's getting slow. All of these things are true, but apparently still at 45 years old or however old he is, if you put a linebacker on him, he's going to score 3 touchdowns.
Apparently. So you keep talking about linebackers and safeties. Are there teams that would put a cornerback on him to cover him? The Bills have, they're running 3 deep at starting caliber cornerback, I would think. So I'm sure that the Corey Graham or someone like that has to be in the conversation at least to cover Graham or to cover Gates. I'm sorry.
The fun thing about the Chargers offense is that there are probably about 5 people that require cornerbacks to cover them. Danny Woodhead is probably too fast for a safety or a linebacker. Ladarius Green is too fast for a linebacker. Antonio Gates is too fast for a linebacker. And then you still have to account for Keenan Allen and Malcolm Floyd. And even if you cover all 5 of those, they'll just throw Eddie Royal at you somewhere. So they just have so many different weapons that are so good at getting open and creating yards after the catch that it's really hard to put a linebacker on any of them. And Seattle tried to game plan around that, and that was kind of their downfall.
So how do you suggest a team would go about it if you were game planning against the San Diego Chargers?
If I were game planning against the Chargers offense, I would probably put 8 guys in the box on every single play. I would shut down the running attack. I would make sure there's a safety on Gates and possibly even a safety on Ladarius Green. And I would dare the wide receivers to beat me downfield on big plays because the offensive line, even though it was pretty good last year, has looked mostly terrible in the first 2 weeks, especially in pass blocking. And neither Keenan Allen nor Malcolm Floyd are very fast. Even Eddie Royal, he's quick, but he's not that fast. So if you can stop them, in the first 10 to 15 yards and just let them have whatever they want over the top, there's a good chance you're going to stop the Chargers.
Okay, and the Bills have a pretty good defensive line, so is that the matchup we should be watching? I mean, you guys have. Did you trot out Doug Legursky as your starting center last week?
No. Doug Legursky
Okay.
is, I believe he was signed as the backup center.
Okay.
We had a guy named Rich Ornberger who has a veteran journeyman guy. He was with the team last year. He was a Arizona Cardinal that came over with Ken Wisenhunt. He can play guard. He can play center. He actually played center for us in the playoff game against the Cincinnati Bengals that they won last year. So he's actually not a bad safety, but DJ Fluker, who's the right tackle, really struggles with speed rushers. And the right guard, whose name is Johnny Troutman, who started a couple games at left guard last year and looked pretty good, has looked absolutely terrible at right guard. After one game, we were calling for him to be replaced. After 2 games, we're screaming for him to be replaced. So if you can get a pass rush on the right side of the line, either up the middle with some strength or around DJ Fluker with some speed, you have a chance of forcing Phillip Rivers into a fumble or an interception because he will make mistakes under pressure.
We're here with John Gennaro from Bolts from the Blue, who's giving us the rundown. That's a good word.
411. The 411. Come on, it's 1998 and everyone's getting the 411.
Yeah, hashtag something. What's a hashtag if it's 1998? Anyway, wow, this has devolved quickly. How is the Chargers offense going to change now that Ryan Matthews is going to be out for at least the short term?
I actually don't know. I have a fear that Donald Brown, who they signed in the offseason to essentially be around for situations like this,
right,
when Ryan Matthews went down, I have a fear that they're just going to plug Donald Brown in Ryan Matthews' spot and run the offense the same way they always have. I do a podcast with a guy named Ben Higgins, and Ben suggested that the Chargers just go with no huddle almost all the time or more of the time than they have, because Ryan Matthews usually comes off the field when the Chargers go into the no huddle, and he gets replaced by either Danny Woodhead or Donald Brown. So there is that potential for them to run the no huddle more often, or hell, maybe even all of the time. But it's still an offense that's going to be based around 7-yard passes. That's what the whole offense is based around, is 7-yard passes.
So would you think that the Bills would be a nickel most of the time then to combat that, if they're not going to be handing it off to those guys as much, as frequently?
Probably,
Okay.
because they're going to try in the beginning to run Donald Brown, and they may even try to run Brandon Oliver, former Buffalo Bull, I believe.
Yeah, UB, yep. Mm-hmm.
They may even try to run him a little bit. He had some success running up the middle of the preseason, so they may see if they can get the ground game going, because they love that. They love when they can get the ground game going, and that pulls the defense up enough that they can start completing their 7-yard passes or just turn them into 10-yard passes, and then the offense is a machine. But more often than not, what they're probably going to do is play more of Danny Woodhead and try and pass the ball even more. And if you want to cover guys like Ladarius Green and Antonio Gates, you were talking about a 3-safety defense, you may need something like that, because you may need one of those safeties to cover each guy a man and then another guy over the top just in case.
Yeah, the Bills only have 3 safeties on their active roster right now. I'd be surprised, I'll say, if they went with 3 safeties, unless Corey Graham was one of the guys that moved from cornerback to safety just for this game, even for the reasons you're talking about right now. I don't know if he would actually be playing safety. He'd be probably playing, closer to the line of scrimmage like he has been at the cornerback position. This was a good question from Buffberg Adelphia. If the Bills' defensive line can dominate the line of scrimmage easier to limit Phillip Rivers, easier. Well, I don't know. Who seems to be one of the streakier quarterbacks in the league. I get it. So do you think that how much pressure do the Bills really need to get to Phillip Rivers mentally?
Essentially, you need to sack him, which in 2 games this year, I think he's been sacked once, but he's been under pressure constantly. But against Arizona, he really didn't have, even though he was under pressure, he didn't have a lot of ugly passes. And against Seattle, he was brilliant, even under pressure, because one of the things that he's picked up since Mike McCoy came and replaced Norv Turner is he steps up more in the pocket and avoids the rush behind him, and he's not afraid to just tuck the ball and run, which is a totally new thing, and he looks like a goofy person when he does it. I think the most common phrase you will hear when Phillip Rivers runs the ball is he looks like a pregnant giraffe or he looks like a baby giraffe, just someone who's not coordinated at all but still somehow making his way in a line. And so that decision-making that has switched to try and force the ball in and has now switched to just tuck the ball and get 3 yards if you can has prevented a lot of it. So if you can't get to him and actually hit him or push the pocket in front of him and have it come back into him, he's still probably going to beat you because he's going to get the ball out real quick.
Well, that's, of course, where we're going to be looking with Kyle Williams and Marcel Darius right up the middle. If you're talking about a backup center and a right guard that's been struggling, even if those two guys are double-teaming Darius, which Darius has been drawing a lot of double teams this year, but it's been leaving Kyle Williams open to get sacks and get in the backfield. He had a sack in both games. So it's been interesting to watch the interior of the defensive line work against other teams, and so that seems like a place that would definitely be susceptible to it. I can't move past the Chargers offense without talking about your brand new offensive coordinator. What's going on with my buddy, Frank Reich? I miss you, Frank.
It kind of depends on who you ask. It's right. The Chargers are a very secretive organization, and so you're not going to get a lot of inside information out of them. And wait, you wanted to say something there or make fun?
Because there's another kind of NFL organization. They've tried to cover up Ray Rice knocking his. Anyway, sorry.
No, but
I'm gonna move on. Keep going.
Mike McCoy answers every single press conference question about players with we're going to play the 52 best guys that we have, and there's absolutely no answers that give you insight into anything at all from anybody. If you were to ask me, what I saw in week 1 was a lot of a brand new offensive coordinator not totally sure of how to call plays. I mean, they had a lead in the fourth quarter and didn't run the ball. They have Ryan Matthews, who's one of the best running backs in the league, in the fourth quarter when you have the lead, and he didn't run the ball. He ran it once and got something like 20 yards, and then just they didn't run again. And so that was just mistake after mistake after mistake. And then in week 2, we saw a perfectly crafted game plan and play calling, and what I think happened was Mike McCoy got a little bit more involved in the offense, realized that Frank probably needs some training wheels to start, some guidance, but he'll get there. But they love him. I mean, they've been grooming him for this job since they hired Ken Wisenhunt. The day they hired Ken Wisenhunt, they hired Frank, I believe, the next day, and they knew that if they did a good job, Ken was gone in a year. Even if they did a mediocre job, Ken was gone in a year, and Frank was groomed to take over. So they love Frank, and the idea is for Frank to be here basically until he gets a head coaching job offer, which, since it's his first year calling plays, he's still probably 3 or 4 good years away from getting. We do have though, as far as connections to the Bills, our left guard you may be familiar with. His name is Chad Reinhardt.
Yep.
And
we were upset when he left last year, and it left a pretty big gaping hole that Legursky tried to fill, and kind of ironically. It didn't work out that way.
We also, he was actually signed to sort of help teach the other offensive linemen the zone blocking scheme of Joe D'Alessandris. And so, who we all love, because what he did with the Chargers offensive line last year, which was just scrap parts, and they ended up as one of the 5 best offensive lines in the league. And with Chad as a starter for the entire season, or most of the season when he wasn't hurt, and he's a starter again this year. So we have some Bills connections, and one of the reasons that, everyone's freaking out about Johnny Troutman shouldn't be the starter at right guard, but everyone's pretty happy with Rich Ornberger. He seems solid, but there is a faith that Coach D, as we call him, as you probably called him.
Absolutely.
Can and probably will figure it out. We believe he has magic in his brain and his hands, and he will right the ship on the offensive line.
Yes, he did a very nice job in Buffalo as well. And you also have Pete Metzler's on your coaching staff, right?
I don't know. He might be the tight end coach. I know we got a tight end coach at some point whose name I don't remember.
Come on. You don't know the tight ends coach? Here, let when they were.
We had an overhaul of the offensive coaching staff last year. I can't be forced to remember all of them.
Yes, he's currently the San Diego Chargers tight end coach. I couldn't tell you. I probably can't tell you who the Bills tight ends coach is, but Pete Metzelaars is the San Diego Chargers. Yeah, and he of course was a very nice player for the Buffalo Bills during the Super Bowl era, and we love him.
As far as the Chargers are concerned, we don't really need a tight end coach because we have Antonio Gates. Like the tight
Just
end
like when
coach,
Frank Reich was like the quarterbacks coach for Peyton Manning.
yeah, absolutely. The tight end coach, as far as we're concerned, could be Mike McCoy's 5-year-old daughter, and we're still going to get the same results.
I understand. All right, well, let's move to the defense a little bit because the Bills' offense was really the biggest question mark coming into the year, and specifically E.J. Manuel, and he's proven capable so far this year, but he hasn't faced a whole lot of adversity. How are the Chargers going to attack the Bills on defense?
Well, first you need to start by realizing that the Chargers, I believe, had the worst secondary in the league last year. It was like historically bad, and the defense as a whole was absolutely awful. The Chargers basically got into a shootout almost every week last year, and it's part of the reason they have this game plan of, keep the offense on the field, win the time of possession, because they were trying to keep the defense off the field. But the defense is significantly better this year, at least it looks like it is after the first 2 weeks, because they upgraded at cornerback. They signed Brandon Flowers when the Chiefs cut him. He's the number 1 cornerback, although he missed the game against the Seahawks. They drafted Jason Verrett with their number 1 overall pick from TCU, and he looks like he's ready to be an effective number 1 or number 2 cornerback right now, and has been an absolute stud in his first 2 games. And really the way they've tried to rebuild this team is with the pass rush. They have Melvin Ingram, a first-round draft pick from 2 years ago, who is kind of an all-around outside linebacker, but was drafted that high because they thought he was a great pass rusher. They have Dwight Freeney, who they signed after the Colts didn't sign him back, who looks like Dwight Freeney, looks terrifying, can get to the quarterback basically whenever he wants. And this year in the second round, I believe, they traded up and got a kid named Jerry Atachu, who we all thought was, a raw prospect and that kind of guy, who in his first couple games has looked like an absolutely dominant pass rusher. He looks like a young Dwight Freeney. So their goal right now is basically you get a strong pass rush from those 3 guys and take heat off the rest of the defense. Take it off the cornerbacks, let the safeties cheat up a little bit, which helps the linebackers, which helps the defensive line. But it's all based around the pass rush. If you can stop the pass rush, you can probably throw all day on this team. You could probably run all day on this team, but no one's been able to. In the first 2 games, they haven't been able to slow it down yet.
So you talked a lot about the defensive ends. Are the defensive tackles something we need to worry about, or are the Bills going to be able to run up the middle?
Well, first of all, it's a 3-4 defense, so all those pass rushers are outside linebackers.
Okay.
The 3 defensive linemen are Corey Liuget, former first-round draft pick, who sometimes he is an absolutely dominating force and looks like the best defensive lineman in the league, and sometimes he's just kind of average, so it's kind of hard to predict which one he's going to be. Their nose tackle is a guy named Sean Lissamore, who's just kind of average. And then the other defensive lineman is a guy named Kendall Reyes, who was a second-round pick, I believe, 2 years ago, who has been an absolute train wreck, and they should probably bench him. As far as whether or not you're going to be able to run on the team, they're really they do a good job of concentrating where the strength of their front 7 goes to try and bait you into running the other way, and then they try and basically catch you in a trap. And sometimes it works and they can shut down running attacks, like the Seahawks weren't really able to get anything going with Marshawn Lynch, but other times it leads to one broken tackle and the guy's gone for a 70, 80-yard run. So obviously with C.J. Spiller and Fred Jackson, there's always a risk for that. But it really all depends on how the Chargers' offense works. If they do like they did against Seattle or like they did in Denver in the big Thursday night game last year or any of their wins towards the end of last year, excuse me, what they really try and do is hold the ball for so long and build a lead that, the second time the offense touches the Buffalo offense touches the ball, the Chargers want them to be down 14-0 and it's midway through the second quarter. Because then they start panicking and then they start throwing. because the defensive line is a bit of a weakness, and you could probably run on it if it's a close game.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the Bills would love for that to happen, to be able to get into the running game a little bit more. They weren't able to do that so successfully last week. Okay, so one of the things that the Bills did last week was chip a lot on Cameron Wake, the Dolphins' Pro Bowl pass rusher, with whether it was a running back or a tight end, helping out right tackle Seantrell Henderson, and then going out into the flats and something like that. What kind of coverage skills do your linebackers have to cover those guys coming out of the field?
They have good coverage, but most of the time in that situation where the guy's going to chip and run out to the flat, he's not going to be met by a linebacker. He's not even really going to be covered by a linebacker, because more often than not, the Chargers defense plays a zone defense. So those guys on the outside are essentially going to be covered by the cornerbacks after they let a wide receiver run past them, and the linebackers are mostly responsible for the middle of the field. So what you'll get is you'll get a running back either wide open because the cornerback hung with the wide receiver too long, or you'll get a running back going up against a cornerback in a super dangerous route.
Well, with guys like, as soon as you say that, it just leads me to think that a guy like Marquise Goodwin and Sammy Watkins, running vertical routes and putting a lot of pressure on the safeties over the top, and the cornerbacks kind of taking a few steps back to cheat, and then that kind of soft underbelly is there for the taking. And I'm sure E.J. Manuel would take it because he takes anything that's less than 7 yards. So I can see that being a big part of the Bills' game plan as well, moving into it.
It definitely could. The one thing you have to consider with that is the Chargers do have the best coverage safety in all of football. Maybe not the best safety in football, but definitely the best coverage over the top safety in all of football. Marcus Gilchrist is not quite as good as Eric Weddle. He's not anywhere near as good as Eric Weddle, but there is still Eric Weddle there. So if you're running verticals down the field, I don't want to say Eric Weddle is that Richard Sherman guy that you don't want to throw anywhere near, or Patrick Peterson guy you don't want to throw anywhere near, but every time you throw deep on the Chargers, you're running a risk because Weddle is that good.
Okay. There's one more Buffalo connection we didn't talk about, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but Tom Telesco, your general manager, actually grew up in Western New York, went to high school actually with the Polians, or with the Polian kids, I should say, and that's how he got his first job in the league. He was an intern.
Polian guy. I forgot he was a Polian guy.
He was an intern actually during training camp with the Buffalo Bills first when he was still in college, and then he got his first NFL actual paycheck from the Carolina Panthers, the expansion Panthers, with Bill Polian running the show down there, and eventually moves his way up through the Indianapolis Colts organization when the Polians get hired over there. So when we had our general manager opening, he was a guy we looked at very closely because he had ties to the organization, and Ralph Wilson had shown a propensity to hire people that he had familiarity with, which is exactly what happened when he hired Buddy Nix as the general manager. So, who you, of course, are familiar with as well from his time spent out in San Diego. See how this keeps working?
Yes, and when Buddy left, Buddy was desperate to leave. That's the thing that I at least know about that situation is Buddy wanted out. And Buffalo offered him away.
Right, yeah. He of course was really good friends, still is really good friends with Marty Schottenheimer, so when Schotty leaves, it was kind of a little bit of, resentment. I don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth or anything like that, but yeah. I know that he wasn't happy about that, I'm sure, right. Just because they are good friends. In fact, Schottenheimer, another former Bill, was at, I can't remember if it was a preseason game. I want to say it was a preseason game. He's been in town in the last month or so to see the Bills and stuff like that. So it's just another guy. He was a guy that we thought they might hire as the coach after Buddy Nix got hired. So
the Chargers have all sorts of ties to the Buffalo Bills because back in 2000 or 99, whenever Mike Riley got fired, it was basically overhaul the whole team and turn us into Buffalo Bills West.
Right. I mean, Jerry Butler goes out.
Our John Butler became our GM.
Jerry Butler's your wide receiver.
Yeah, John Butler became our GM. A.J. Smith came with him to be his assistant GM, also from Buffalo. And Marty became the coach. And one of the very first things they did was sign Flutie. And so it was, and at the time, I wasn't blogging at the time, but I remember there was a lot of talk about they're basically turning it into Buffalo Bills West, and that's kind of the foundation that got us here. I mean, A.J. Smith was fired a year or two ago, but a lot of the same principles that built this roster were built on the framework of the Buffalo Bills, specifically, I guess, the 90s Bills.
Yeah, you forgot about Marcellus Wiley, too, who was one of their big free agent signings, too, and a former first-round pick for the Bills, the guy that was supposed to replace Bruce Smith.
Yes, and the last connection I can even think of, and we're probably boring the hell out of everyone, is the San Diego Chargers literally falling all over themselves trying to sign Mario Williams. It was a year or two ago when he was still in Buffalo, making desperate phone calls, begging him to get on the plane, come to San Diego, and then he signed with the Bills. And I don't know if that's been good or bad since, but that
was good for us. I'll tell you that.
And he basically replaced Sean Merriman, ex-San Diego Charger. So plenty of ties.
There you go.
Ties, current and former.
Yeah, Sean Merriman didn't work out so well, but Mario Williams has worked out pretty well. We're glad we have him. Yeah, that worked out all right. Well, I thank John Gennaro for joining us from Bolts from the Blue. I'm sure we'll be doing questions with them and some blog interaction stuff over Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and of course Sunday as the Chargers come from the West Coast, which I wanted to ask you about, so I'm glad I remember that. The Chargers don't have the best record going all the way across the country. What kind of insights can you lend to that particular statistic?
Nobody has the best record going all the way across the country. The Niners are bad at it. The Bills are bad at it. The Patriots are bad at it. Every team that's on the West Coast has a worse record playing road games on the East Coast than they do road games on the West Coast, and vice versa. So it's tough. It's tough. It shouldn't be. You should think, hey, you eat breakfast at 6 o'clock here, you eat breakfast at 6 o'clock there, you should feel fine. But something about the body clock and whatever, and just the wear and tear of, I guess, flying cross country in a chartered jet is just enough to knock someone off their game. But I bring it up every single time. I mean, the Chargers have to play in Miami, 4 or 5 weeks from now. I brought it up when I was previewing that game. Every time the Chargers have to travel all the way to the East Coast, I worry about the travel. More often, though, I worry about the weather, and I'm happy this time that we're playing Buffalo in September and not December, because even though they tend to play okay in the cold, I'd rather they not.
Right. And the weather is supposed to be a little bit on the chilly side with the chance for some rain, so we'll see how that affects the game. But correct me if I'm wrong, because I know that we played 3 years ago, but 6 years ago or whatever it was the last time that I think the Chargers came to Buffalo, and I remember the Bills pulled off a pretty surprising win that season. That was like a Kavika Mitchell game where he just kind of came out of nowhere and had an interception of Rivers near the end to save the game, or I think it was just to clinch a lead, which was weird that we had a lead, but that was like the power went out, or a balloon hit a transformer. I don't know if you remember any of this. But
I'm very familiar with this game. We actually talked about it fairly recently because my co-host on our podcast was actually at that game, and we sort of talked about the experience of being there against the experience of trying to watch on TV as it blacked out and not having any idea what's going on, but all of a sudden the Bills are winning, and it was a bit of a nightmare for us.
Yeah. Well, I thank you again, John Gennaro from Bolts from the Blue, and we'll see you guys next week on Buffalo Rumblings Live.